Thanks very much for asking me to be here. It's a great series of topics that we're going to be covering this morning. I'm eager to get into them, Gabriel.
Well, let's jump right in, and just a real thank you to APDU for hosting all of this, and of course Amy O'Hara. And Bill, I mentioned that you really don't need an introduction, but I'm going to give one anyway to all the folks that are just tuning in, and wanted to start there, and then we're going to get into our taking stock conversation.
Sure.
So. Bill, of course, you are the Senior Fellow in Economics at the Economic Policy Innovation Center, but you're also the Coolidge Fellow at Calvin Coolidge Presidential Foundation. But importantly for this conversation, prior to those appointments, you served as the 15th Commissioner of Labor Statistics at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in Washington, D.C. You have a whole set of other affiliations as well before that, including Vice President for Research at Mercatus Center at George Mason University and the Chief Economist for the Senate Budget Committee. Importantly, you founded the Center for Data Analysis at the Heritage Foundation, President of the Institute for Humane Studies, and you started your career at the Sprint Corporation in Kansas City.
Yeah.
But also important for today, you serve on committees at the American Statistical Association and American Economic Association, and I know that some of that work will actually come into our conversation today. So welcome, thank you so much for taking some time. So, like you said, we'll jump right in. Let's start. Let's take stock. Where are we at right now? What changes are you seeing as part of the social sector evidence building and statistical ecosystem?
Sure.
Let's start there.
Well, maybe we can start with what has most recently happened, which is, as many of your listeners will know, the White House, the Office of Management and Budget, dropped the more detailed version of their budget submission. They had a few weeks ago given us an indication of directions that they would go with top line spending levels for each department, but we really weren't able to see below those top lines to what was going to be happening in particularly the statistical agencies, right? Mm-hmm. So we got that view, and anyone can go and see the information that they provided if you go to the whitehouse.gov OMB. Well, I think the thing that was most striking is a renewal of a proposal from the first Trump administration to consolidate the Bureau of Labor Statistics into the Department of Commerce. I think this time there's more interest in Congress for that to happen, but it's a very, very big lift. Anytime you move an agency as large as BLS, as 3,000 people, from one department to another department, you require statutory authority. There's all kinds of things that happen in the appropriations structure, but it looks like this may in fact happen. We know that BLS is getting less funding next year than they had in the previous year, mm-hmm. But we don't know particularly what sort of focus the administration wants the Bureau to have. The Bureau of Economic Analysis is also sort of being refocused and reorganized into the Commerce Department's larger economic statistics mandate, and the Census Bureau is undergoing some changes as well. So it could very well be we'll see those three organizations still having their separate identities, but not being separately run as much as they are now, mm-hmm. and sharing more resources, in which case, if they share more resources, they may not need more funding. Mm-hmm. So let's just sort of hold our breath here for a moment. I know it's easy to jump to conclusions, but we really do need to see more details about that. My colleagues and I are studying very closely through the American Statistical Association in particular, the effects of both the budget submission of Friday, but more importantly, the previous 140 days of personnel changes, program changes, data sort of restructuring in a case of cancellation. We know, for example, that about 14% of the workforce at the Census Bureau is no longer there. Mm-hmm. That's largely because of voluntary separations, but it's also because of some other kinds of separations. That is true of many of the statistical organizations. The question that we're all going to want to ask, and it's a very important question to ask, how does that affect the operations of the statistical system? Are they still going to be able to produce everything that they produced in the past? I think the answer to that is probably no. And I think that the administration is going to be fine with that. And I'll tell you why I think that. In the submission on Friday, the budget submission from OMB that I've just talked about, there is a little line that says that the Bureau of Labor Statistics will now emphasize the principal federal economic indicators more. Now, that's not a quote, but it's basically that's what it was said. If that's true, that means that when the rubber hits the road, some of the reports that BLS now produces, maybe we could just say the annual reports, or maybe even some of the monthly reports, will no longer appear, which would reduce costs and make it perhaps more understandable why the funding level has dropped a little bit. So there's an organization called the Friends of BLS. I'm one of the chairs of that organization, and we'll be issuing later this week, I hope, a letter plus a compilation of findings from the budget, not only about BLS but about the sister organizations that interact with BLS, principally Census and BEA. So watch this space. That's kind of where we're at. We've had a large reduction in staffing. It has not inhibited so far the production of the reports. There have been some problems addressed in the surveys. These are not resolved, and I hope we can have a chance to talk about surveys a little bit later. I haven't seen major reports coming from organizations that haven't been severely affected. Let me just back that up and explain what I just said. Of course, the National Center for Education Statistics is almost non-existent. I think there's only 3 or 4 employees left over there. And so their publication series is no longer being pursued. We hope that will reemerge in other places, but that's still detail to come. There are other statistical organizations that have had some of their data sets eliminated in some fashion or another, or suppressed might be a term we could use here. And we'll see if that affects other publications that were totally reliant on those data sets, but use them as inputs. So I guess the bottom line I'd like to say is that there's just a lot of changes going on, Gabriel, just a lot. Honestly, you can't watch this game without a scorecard, and that's why the American Statistical Association is such a great place to go to find out what's happening. We have several pages there. APDU is following this closely, so members can go and get information from your organization. It's important we stay informed and not listen to a lot of rumors. What is true and what is not true right now is a very important question to ask.
It's an important question to ask, and we're going to get into a little bit of what some of this implies for in terms of opportunities for how we think about building moving forward and some of the challenges. I did want to put us in a historical context, though, and something, Bill, that I've heard you talk about broad swaths of history in very short periods of time, which is really pretty profound, and including some reflections that the federated system that we have right now is actually it's part of the design. Right? It's not necessarily a bug. And some of these consolidations are reaction to just how it grew up intentionally, right? And so given that there's a lot of things to watch right now, there's a lot of changes, and we'll talk about what that implies right now for the future. Can we just look back into history for a moment, and some of the reductions in workforce that have happened in the past, some of the changes that have happened in the past? Would love for you to tell our listeners a bit about that history.
Sure. Well, I think the first thing for us to appreciate is the fact that statistics, the generation of federal statistics, has been a part of this country since its founding. Almost the very first thing that happened was a major report that Alexander Hamilton, the Secretary of the Treasury, wrote called the Report on Manufacturers. This was very important for our tariff policy and for borrowing money from the Dutch bankers. And he used data where he could find it, but was appalled by the fact that data was not very good. Well, he was also, along with Thomas Jefferson, in charge of the first census. And you can see in the census of 1790 an effort that ultimately came out in the report on manufacturers to develop detailed information that could be used to run public policy. The census was stood up and stood down, stood up and stood down until 1900. It wasn't a permanent organization. So how did the statistical system get started? It actually started in the Agriculture Department. The Department of Agriculture is one of our oldest organizations that looks at a segment of the economy. Just think back to the 19th century and you'll realize or appreciate we were overwhelmingly an agricultural economy by far. I mean, it was ridiculous to well over 90%, I'm sure, maybe 95% worked in some form of agriculture or an ancillary part of agriculture. So
important department, yes.
So the National Center for Education Statistics, one of the oldest statistical organizations that this country has, did not start in the Department of Education, which didn't come around until the 1970s. It started in the Department of Agriculture to study the kinds of training that was going on and what the federal government could do through its land-grant colleges and the Morrill Act and the Homestead Act, for that matter, to improve the educational or the training capacity of the agricultural laboring population. And so our statistical system started in a department. It started and that became the kind of a mode that you see replicated time and time again. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, which started in the state of Massachusetts and came down to Washington with Carol D. Wright, the founder of BLS, was in the Interior Department. That was the place where labor analysis was being done. Interior Department, you would think, why the Interior Department? Well, think back to the 19th century, and the Interior Department was the place where we were now going to talk about, city laborers, manufacturing laborers, people who were working with their hands in factories. Where else would you put it? You wouldn't put it in the Agriculture Department. And there weren't many other places to put it. The War Department, that would not be relevant. So it went in Interior. So my point is that we have, of course, we have a federated system anyway, the states and the federal government, that's a federation, if you will. And we had department secretaries that represented segments of our public policy portfolio. And so our federated statistical system both reflected the fact that we are comfortable with that constitutional structure and that we established our statistical bodies inside departments. So you can say, well, that's a federated statistical system. It's not centrally organized. Mm-hmm. It's not a mistake. That's how we intended to do it. It was an intentional form. We wanted to get information about specific parts of the policy portfolio, specific parts of the economy and society. So we would stand up a statistical group. We still do that, by the way, Gabriel. Homeland Security, which was formed after 9/11, has a recognized statistical unit now, developed to support the work that Homeland Security does in immigration, in defense, in law enforcement. It's specific for that purpose. So it's unlike many European countries. Many, indeed, Canada, for that matter, it's not European, but it has that model that has a centralized system. They also have a notion of government which is less federated. It's more centralized. They're comfortable with that approach. They understand it, and their system has developed around that centralized approach. So we have that. That's our history. That's in our culture. As we change the system, which I think we badly need to do, we're going to be including that culture and that history in our deliberations of the direction of change. That's why it's very unlikely that we'll ever go to a totally centralized statistical system. We just don't have that in our bones, but we probably should think about consolidation. And I'd love to talk about that. It's a direction which we could profitably go, I think.
Absolutely. So let's take that invitation and go there. Before we do, though, so you talked about Department of Homeland Security setting up its own statistical body. How many of these do we have at this point, like as of today? We have about 26 that we're recognizing as full-fledged statistical operations. But when I was the Bureau, I headed up the Bureau of Labor Statistics. I also chaired the ISP committee, the interagency committee on statistical policy.
which was the official governing body of the statistical system. And we asked that question: how many are out there beyond the 26? We think there's about 100 inside the federal government, but they're little units. They are not widely recognized as statistical bodies. They're not supported by OMB directly. So I think the right answer right now is 26.
It's 26 plus. It sounds like
there are 13 that are recognized by statute. These are the principal statistical bodies, and then another 13, like the State Department's statistical unit, Homeland Security, which are emerging as really important statistical agencies.
So that's great to just scope the size of this, right? Yeah. And given where you sit right now, given previous roles that you've been able to see across all of this, Bill, which is really which makes you an important person to reflect on this. And so, when we've talked before, you've talked about some of the opportunities that are present right now, with some of the changes that are happening for some of that consolidation, recognizing that we came up in a federated system, but some of the centralization may actually create some opportunities for us. And I know that you're involved in a set of work to actually consider what that is and peer into the future and what some of those possibilities are. So I wanted to invite you to talk a little bit about what some of these opportunities are that you and your colleagues are discussing.
Several of us in the last 3 months have felt that the disruption to the statistical system, which is palpable, right? The number of resignations, the cancellation of series, very disruptive, whether it's good or bad, very disruptive. That's a great time for us to make change. Rather than sort of fall back and be defensive and resent what's going on, why don't we take this opportunity of rapid change to then make it even more rapid, to advance a vision of a new system that we, as the principal stakeholders, as it were, or the professional stakeholders, would like to see. And that call really did resonate well among former agency heads, people who are very active supporters of the statistical system, a kind of leadership group. So we formed a committee, it's a small committee, to explore all the directions we might be able to go, and then bring in as many of these additional stakeholders as possible to a discussion of the future. We think that there are many directions, but a few that are very promising that would provide for us greater efficiency, a greater defense of private rights. Privacy is an enormously important issue when you're collecting data from people and then publishing the statistics based on those privately held data points. That would assure a greater innovation in the statistical system, because the world is changing very rapidly. Statistical concepts have to change as rapidly. We have to reflect the world. We can't reflect the history of the world. We need to reflect where it's at right now. So we're in this process, right, of discussing what is the future. So there's a couple of ways to go. Maybe the smallest change you could make is to make the one that the White House is now proposing, and thank goodness that they're taking the lead on this, and that's the consolidation of the Bureau of Labor Statistics into BEA and Census. Why would that be a good move? It is a good move because BEA and BLS share a lot and work with a lot of the census data. In order for Census to share that data, to provide it to BLS and to BEA for their work, requires a host of lawyers and a lot of memoranda of understanding, contracts, if you will. It's very burdensome and inefficient. And there are even then limits to that. Data that cannot be shared because we're not in the same agency, we're not in the same department, we're not in the same, under the same legal structure. So we think that there are efficiencies in consolidation of those three agencies. There are some issues, other issues that are maybe not as promising, but let's just put those to one side. You could then say, well, let's think about a more consolidated system in general, where all of the agencies that do statistical agencies, that's what when I use the word agencies, all those statistical agencies that do health related matters now are aligned together. All of those do defense and security issues and law enforcement issues are aligned together. And there's some natural groupings in our federated system, which if those individual agencies were consolidated or connected legally to each other, there might be more data sharing. And here I like to say there might be more protection of privately provided data. One of the most important things about a working, healthy statistical system is the trust that they engender in the public that gives the data to them. We can't, even if we were a police state, go out and force people to give us their data. I won't name the country, but everybody will know it. In my international work, I often talk to the chief statistician of this country. That country is clearly run by an autocrat, and it's a big country. And it's not China. I wish it was, because China has an emergingly good statistical system. They wanted to force their population to provide data, and they were having major collection issues, major compliance issues, for the very same reasons. If you don't trust the government, if you don't trust the statistical agency to use your data appropriately, well, you're not going to give it. So I think if there's a consolidation, then we can have more efficient and effective and well-financed effort to protect our data. That means we can afford better data centers. We can afford better IT equipment. One of the major problems that a small agency has, and I'm talking maybe like a bureau inside a department that's not one of the three that I've mentioned. Justice statistics, for example, that might be a good example. They don't have the budget to really buy the latest IT equipment or to find a Sigma 5 data center that is completely secure from the Chinese and the Russians and all the other people trying to get our data on a daily basis. And so private data is more vulnerable. With consolidation, you can see the promise of less vulnerability, and that's really crucial. And then I think if you consolidated, you'd bring the brains of bright people more closely together to work on problems that will produce the statistics that better reflect the world that we live in. So innovation would be, and intellectual entrepreneurship would be encouraged. You would have your mathematicians working together, your statisticians and your behavioral scientists would be connected to each other in a much more intimate way than they are at present. And I can tell you that when that happens, my clear experience is that you get a lot more innovation and thinking. And then I think the final thing that consolidation does is it allows management to see across many budgets and to find ways in which we can use the public's funds more efficiently. And I do think that efficient use of the public funds is very important, especially in a time when we're adopting more AI interface, where we can in fact see reductions in our operating costs simply because we're using AI systems. So that's kind of the middle ground. I think one more, and I'll stop on this, but there's some in between those two, but at the extreme is a centralized system, one ring to rule them all. It's a system that works in a lot of countries. So, for example, in Great Britain, you have the Office of National Statistics, which is a wonderful example of a centralized system that effectively works with the English county system, with the English municipal governments, their trade and maritime authorities, and also with the Parliament to develop statistics very much like ours. And so if you put the ONS on one side and you put the American statistical system on the other and said, oh, who's doing the most in these areas, you would have a hard time distinguishing the two. The British have a price series, they have labor force statistics, they take demographics, and we do the same. So a centralized system can work really well. As I mentioned a little bit ago, I don't think that's in our culture, but it's clearly an alternative, and many people in this country, United States, do believe that is a direction we should go. So this group that I'm chairing will be offering a number of alternatives, not making a single recommendation, but offering these alternatives well articulated, which we will then take to the White House and to the Congress and to stakeholders around the country and say that let's have a good debate on what kind of a statistical system we want. Here are the leading possibilities.
So, Bill, much like an earlier conversation in this series, the opportunities and the challenges are intertwined in what you're sharing. We have we have the history of the system that grew up around a federated model that is very different from a centralized model. There's opportunities to move somewhere in the middle of the spectrum that you just talked about, and with the challenges around privacy and security forefront in our minds and trying to manage and balance that. We have a couple of questions from the audience, Bill, that I wanted to land on, and then I wanted to wrap in 5 minutes on just a call out for the work that you're talking about and when folks can go and read it and learn from it. Okay. And so one of the questions that actually connects directly to that that spectrum that you're talking about, where you have somewhere like Canada or the UK that has that centralized statistical agency. Are there other countries that have multiple statistical agencies? Are there things that we can learn from them? Are there other federated models like the United States that there are learnings from or that you're considering?
Well, even the most centralized, there has some competing organizations. You take Great Britain, for example. ONS covers most of everything, but then the central bank, the Bank of England, has its own statistical arm, which provides a good deal of information about trade, the monetary system, the degree to which industry is consolidated and efficient. So even in that system, there are things like that. I think the system in France and Germany are examples of a blended, consolidated, centralized system that work pretty well. As you know, France is really challenged very much like we are, with very independent, culturally diverse populations, and organized around their provinces, if you will, sort of a county system, but it's more historical. These are small kingdoms that were right. Consolidated into the country of France, and that's also the case in Germany. If you've ever been to Munich, you're standing in an independent country for all practical purposes. So I think the model which the Europeans offer, and some offer them in more elegant forms than others, is one of the middle ground that I just described, where you have some centralization, some diversity, but generally speaking, a more consolidated statistical system that helps use money better and creates a more innovative approach. That said, I want to say this about the United States statistical system, and I don't mean any offense to my non-U.S. brothers and sisters, but I think ours is the best in terms of providing all of the good characteristics that I mentioned a little bit ago, from privacy protection to innovation. We want to keep it that way. That's why we are, Gabriel, that's why we're so eager to take this moment to find a path to a more efficient system. I'll just say one thing, our survey system use of surveys is really dying on the vine, which is one of the motivations why we should change. Response rates are down and costs are up, way up, and we really won't have that system unless we change it in fundamental ways. It's easier to change that system in fundamental ways under a more consolidated system than a more diverse system, in my view. So I think there are reasons beyond just this current disruption to look at the future of the statistical system. It really does need a little modernization.
So, Bill, we are at the end of our time, and that is a fantastic place to end. Where should folks look for the compilation of some of the work that you are doing right now, and when?
So I think the easiest way to find our work is to go to the American Statistical Association and look at the tab Nations Data at Risk. It's named that way because of a report we did last year on that very same subject, so named. And under that tab, you'll find information about the current challenges in the system. We also go through all the rumors and in other things and validate which is right, which is wrong, and we will be posting information about this modernization effort that we've just been discussing. So that's a good place to go. And of course, the ASA is a great organization to support. If you're not a member, you should be.
Well, Bill, I love that plug at the very end, and certainly folks that are listening, spread the word about where to find some information about this, and check back also not only just now but in the fall for some of the report outs of the opportunities that are available in thinking through the modernization of the system. Bill, this is the end of our time. I want to say a huge thank you to you and to APDU for hosting this time, and we're at the end. Thanks.
My pleasure entirely. Thank you, Gabriel.
All right. Take good care.